And then he became the absolute love of your life. He didn't just become my husband, he became my everything. Yes, truly. This is the man who literally gave a piece of himself to keep you alive. Eventually, he saved my life by donating one of his own kidneys to me. There were no reality TV cameras rolling, no blinding stage lights, no backup dancers in fringe, and definitely no sequins. It was just a quiet, raw moment, decades in the making, that absolutely nobody saw coming. After Tina Turner passed away, the entire world grieved the loss of the Queen of Rock and Roll, endlessly replaying her triumphs, her tragedies, and that unforgettable voice. But once the headlines faded and the news cycle moved on, a new voice emerged, the one person who knew her soul best. What he shared wasn't some polished PR tribute. It was something entirely different, something deeply personal. And honestly, it caught even her most die-hard fans completely off guard. So what did Tina leave behind that shattered expectations, and why is he choosing this specific moment to finally break his silence? To understand the end, we have to look at a childhood defined by abandonment and survival. Tina entered this world already carrying the heavy baggage of instability. Her early years were rocked by the toxic, volatile relationship between her parents Zelma and Floyd Bullock, creating a home life that was essentially a war zone. Then, when Tina was just 11 years old, her world collapsed. Her mother abruptly fled the house to escape her abusive husband, leaving little Tina behind without a single warning or explanation. Not long after, her father remarried and took off, too effectively abandoning her and dumping her on her strict religious grandparents. Losing both parents like that, first emotionally, then physically, left a scar that went way deeper than anyone realised. Tina spent years looking back on that chapter with a profound sense of rejection. She later confessed in interviews that she felt completely unwanted, unloved and forgotten by the very people who were supposed to protect her. That was a wound that never really healed, and it shaped how she viewed her own self-worth well into her adult life. And living with her grandparents, that didn't exactly provide a warm, fuzzy shelter. Her paternal grandparents were devout Baptists who ran a tight ship, prioritising strict religious discipline over any kind of emotional support or affection. Tina was basically a live-in maid, expected to handle grueling household chores and show up for church every single time the doors opened. Even though she found an escape in gospel music, the heavy toll of isolation and loneliness was always hanging over her head. She had memories of picking cotton as a little girl and trying to navigate a fractured family, which just added to the hardness of her life. It speaks volumes that Tina later admitted she couldn't recall a single moment of feeling nurtured or safe during those formative years. That childhood became a brutal training ground, teaching her how to survive the worst of life long before she ever tasted success. And the misery didn't stop there. It followed her right into her teenage years. Just after a brief reunion with her mother in St. Louis, tragedy struck again. Tina lost one of the few people who had been a rock for her, her maternal grandmother. Around the same time, her half-sister was killed in a car wreck, piling on the grief and making her feel even more solitary in the world. Those experiences left deep emotional scars, but ironically, they also built the steel backbone she would need to endure what was coming next. Working as a domestic servant in the wealthy white homes of Tennessee gave a teenage Tina a front row seat to a life of luxury she couldn't touch. She saw a very different reality, one that highlighted the unfairness of her own situation and strengthened her sense of injustice. People love to talk about Tina's transformation into a global icon later in life. But we rarely talk about the terrified girl who was moulded by silence and abandonment. You have to wonder, did that early betrayal condition her to tolerate the nightmare relationship she would later have with Ike Turner? Was that early conditioning the feeling of being completely removed and powerless in her own life? Actually, the psychological foundation for the decades she spent trapped in that cycle of abuse without walking away. In the end, she became the ultimate symbol of survival. But her origin story is a lot darker than the highlight reels suggest. It's the story of a girl who learned how to suffer long before she ever learned how to sing a note. But before the world knew her name, one random night in a club would flip the entire script of her life. Going from a church choir to the Queen of Rock and Roll wasn't a simple hop and a skip. The metamorphosis from Anna Mae Bullock to the global powerhouse known as Tina Turner didn't happen overnight. It was forged in fire, a mix of raw talent, fearlessness, and a bit of destiny. After moving to St. Louis in her teens, Anna Mae got hooked on the vibrant rhythm and blues scene that was pulsing through the city's nightlife. It was at one of those hot spots, the Manhattan Club, where she crossed paths with Ike Turner and his band, the Kings of Rhythm. She was completely mesmerised by the performance, and in a bold move, she asked for the mic. That one moment changed history. Her voice was unpolished, but emotionally explosive, and it impressed Ike so much that he hired her on the spot. It wasn't long before he completely erased her identity and rechristened her Tina Turner, manufacturing a persona he could dominate and sculpt to his liking. The name Tina wasn't just a catchy stage moniker for the marquee. It was a calculated legal trap set by Ike, who went as far as trademarking the name to guarantee that if she ever found the courage to leave, she would leave with nothing. From the very beginning, her ascent to stardom was inextricably linked with manipulation and control. Yet the moment she stepped into the spotlight, Tina exploded with a force that defied physics. It was a jarring contradiction to her life off stage, where she remained unsure of her own value. Under the lights, however, she was electric, feral, passionate, and absolutely captivating. Crowds were left spellbound by her commanding dominance over the room and that signature raw, gravelly voice. Even back in those formative years, it was obvious she possessed a rare it factor, a natural charisma that no amount of record label coaching could ever create. Their act rapidly evolved into the Ike and Tina Turner Revue, a high-octane frenzy that defied genre boundaries and became the absolute gold standard of the R&B circuit. Tina's aggressive, kinetic dancing and soul-shaking vocals quickly became the brand's identity, effortlessly overshadowing Ike in terms of raw popularity. Yet despite her rising star power, she remained shackled to him, bound by ironclad contracts and a twisted emotional dependency. Ike pulled the strings from the shadows, handling the arrangements and the business deals, while Tina provided the fire that lit up every single venue. You have to wonder, was that ferocity on stage her way of screaming out the frustration she was forced to swallow in her private life? Was the stage the only territory where she truly had ownership of her body and soul? Regardless, Tina was growing larger than life, far outshining the act itself. She was on the precipice of breaking free, even if she hadn't consciously realised it yet. Her evolution into Tina Turner was far more profound than a simple marketing gimmick. It served as an emotional shield and a survival mechanism for a young black woman emerging from a shattered family background. The stage offered everything her real life lacked. She found power, prestige, and total control over the masses. But the bigger the icon became, the wider the chasm grew between the superstar image and the woman underneath. Was Tina ever really permitted to be Anna Mae again, or did the crushing weight of fame strip away every last remnant of her true self? These dark questions cast a long shadow over the retelling of her origin story. It is a tale of spectacular reinvention, certainly, but also the story of a woman desperately trying to safeguard the last fragments of her humanity before stepping into the blinding lights. Stripping away the backstage drama, the Ike and Tina Turner Revue stood as one of the most volatile and electrifying musical acts of the 1960s and early 70s. It was a full-blown spectacle of soul grit and relentless rhythm that left audiences exhausted just watching. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable. Tina demanded absolute attention with her rapid-fire movements and raspy wail, while Ike drove the band with a conductor's precision and a dictator's force. They were relentless road warriors, headlining major venues across the United States and Europe, and even landing the coveted spot opening for the Rolling Stones. Fans were intoxicated by their energy and apparent connection, never guessing that the dynamic they were cheering for was a complete fabrication. What appeared to be perfect musical synergy was actually a carefully curated illusion designed to mask a deep-rotting dysfunction. Behind closed doors, their relationship was a nightmare defined by absolute control, coercion, and brutal violence. Tina would later confess that while the spotlight burned bright, she was suffering in a suffocating silence that no one saw. The marriage, which officially began in 1962, was plagued by a cycle of horrific abuse encompassing both physical battering and psychological torture. Tina was beaten, isolated from friends, and manipulated, all while being paraded before adoring crowds as one half of a glamorous power couple. Ike's stranglehold extended to every facet of their partnership, from the bank accounts to the branding, leaving Tina with zero personal agency or creative freedom. Is it possible that the high-energy performances that made them legends were also Tina's form of escapism, a fleeting moment to reclaim her own body? This sharp contrast between her triumphant public image and her tormented private reality became the cruel duality that defined Tina's existence. As the review racked up commercial wins with massive hits like Proud Mary and River Deep Mountain High, Tina was increasingly celebrated by the industry as a trailblazing force of nature. Yet, the moment the music stopped, she lived in terror. The sparkling fringe dresses often served to hide fresh bruises and bone-deep exhaustion. Did the audience ever look past the sequins and the sweat to see the pain in her eyes? Or did the fame and the spectacle provide the ultimate cover story for a domestic horror show playing out just behind the curtain? Over time, the physical and emotional toll began to outweigh the awards. While Ike took credit for the sound, it was Tina's resilience and artistry that kept the machine running. The success of the review was purchased at a staggering, devastating cost. And Tina's slow transformation from a musical muse into a martyr wasn't entirely lost on those within their inner circle. Even decades later, when Tina finally exposed the reality of their marriage, the public struggled to reconcile the violence with the golden image they had worshipped. But perhaps that remains the most haunting truth of all the world had been cheering for a performance that was in part a desperate cry for help. It was a bold stand against abuse hidden in plain sight. In 1981, Tina Turner made a choice that would send shockwaves far beyond the music industry. She shattered the silence. In a bombshell interview with People magazine, she revealed for the first time the gruesome extent of the torture she survived while married to Ike Turner. Back in the day, domestic violence was the industry's dirty little secret, something whispered about but never acknowledged in the open. Then came Tina's memoir, hitting the shelves like a bombshell and exposing a nightmare that was raw, unfiltered, and utterly terrifying. She detailed horrors that made your stomach turn, Ike hurling boiling coffee at her, forcing her to witness depraved acts and beating her brutally, while her courage to expose such devastatingly personal trauma flew in the face of a culture that preferred to ignore victims or blame them for their own suffering. This was especially revolutionary for women of colour in the spotlight. Dropping those truth bombs wasn't just about getting it off her chest, it was an act of defiance. It triggered a massive cultural wake-up call. Tina's raw honesty completely flipped the script on how we talk about domestic violence in America. It hit hardest in the entertainment industry, a place where sequins and smiles are often used to cover up the ugly reality of pain behind closed doors. Even experts like Dr. Lenore Walker, a legend in the field of abuse psychology, noted that Tina's testimony validated the nightmares of survivors across the globe. It sent a loud message to judges, politicians, and the public violence isn't just something that happens in poor neighbourhoods. It happens in mansions too. If a rock and roll queen as fierce and iconic as Tina Turner could be battered and controlled, then nobody was truly safe. It forced the entire country to look in the mirror and accept some hard, uncomfortable truths about what a victim looks like and who the monsters really are. But don't think for a second that speaking up was easy. Tina later admitted she was terrified that the industry would blacklist her or call her a liar. She worried if fans would still see the rock star or just a pity case, and the biggest fear, would Ike come for revenge? Pushing through that terror didn't just heal her soul. It became a defining moment for an entire generation of women watching her every move. In the media frenzy that followed, she stayed regally poised, refusing to let reporters drag her back into the mud just for ratings. A perfect example was back in 1993, when a messy interviewer tried to trigger her on camera by playing a recording of Ike's voice. Tina shut it down cold, simply saying, "I have nothing to say." That wasn't her being quiet. That was a queen setting a boundary to protect her peace. Those shocking revelations went beyond tabloid gossip, eventually becoming the backbone of her legendary 1986 bestseller, I, Tina. That book laid the groundwork for the blockbuster hit we all know, What's Love Got to Do with It?, bringing her struggle to the big screen. But here is the thing, even with the hit movie and the Broadway musical, Tina hated that her legacy was forever tied to the worst years of her life. However, she couldn't deny the undeniable power of her truth. Years down the road, she reflected on how opening that door gave countless other women the courage to finally pack their bags and save themselves. Silence might have kept her alive in the past, but her voice set millions free. In the end, Tina didn't just break the silence, she blew the roof off. She smashed a massive societal taboo and rewrote the definition of strength, showing the world exactly what it looks like to rebuild an empire from the ashes. Remember when she finally escaped Ike in 1976? She ran across a freeway with nothing but 36 cents and a gas station credit card, betting everything on herself. Walking away wasn't merely a turning point in her personal life. It was a terrifying freefall into the unknown without a single safety net to catch her. During the bitter divorce proceedings, she shocked everyone by walking away from millions in alimony real estate and royalties, demanding only the rights to the stage name Tina Turner. That moniker carried the heavy baggage of her trauma, yet she recognised it as the solitary lifeline capable of pulling her out of the wreckage. The reality was stark and brutal. She survived on food stamps, scrubbed strangers' floors for cash, and crashed on the sofas of sympathetic friends. For a woman who had once commanded global stages, this was a humiliating rock bottom. Yet it served as the essential ground zero for her independence. Even while facing the shame of her reduced circumstances and public scrutiny, Tina possessed an iron will that simply refused to break. She hustled relentlessly, taking any gig available from cheesy Las Vegas lounge acts to odd variety shows, doing whatever was necessary to keep the lights on. These gritty performances were a far cry from the glamour of sold-out arenas, but they were crucial for keeping her head above water. Industry insiders sneered, writing her off as a washed-up nostalgia act or merely the surviving half of a toxic duo, doubting she could ever eclipse Ike's shadow. The burning question on everyone's mind was whether the public would embrace her as a powerhouse soloist or just see a broken woman without her partner. Confronting these doubts, she began the grueling process of crafting a second act that would be defined strictly by her own rules and no one else's. Away from the flashing lights, she was grinding endlessly to shed the old cabaret image and forge a sound that was raw and authentic. She sought out fresh blood in the studio, pushing her vocal cords to the limit and diving headfirst into the rock and pop scenes she adored. These were the edgy genres she had always craved, but was forbidden to touch. And her drive wasn't about seeking petty vengeance against her ex. Instead, it was fueled by a desperate, blazing need to finally amplify her own voice without a filter or a master. This wasn't just a career move, it was a battle for her identity, striving to exist as more than just a victim or a sensational tabloid headline. But would the world actually tune in? The desolate years leading up to her 1984 smash hit Private Dancer were a literal test of fire. Yet that struggle forged the steel backbone needed for what would become the most legendary comeback story in the history of rock and roll. Her utter refusal to let a man define her legacy was revolutionary, defying a music business that often pigeonholes women by the relationships they leave behind. It was a gritty, unglamorous climb, but she didn't just reconstruct a career. She birthed a fierce, unstoppable icon who stood taller and stronger than ever before. By living her truth, she became living proof for anyone who has been knocked down that pressing the reset button isn't a sign of frailty, it is the ultimate power move. Right at the moment everyone was ready to write her epitaph, Tina delivered a blindside hit that absolutely nobody predicted. Let's talk about the absolute juggernaut that was the Private Dancer era. When Private Dancer hit the shelves in 1984, Tina Turner had already walked through fires that would have consumed lesser stars. She faced down domestic terror, financial ruin, and the cold shoulder from a music biz she basically helped build. But instead of fading into the background like an oldies act, she orchestrated a return so fierce it completely rewrote her history. This wasn't just a solo debut album, it was a full-blown metamorphosis. Working with a fresh, cutting-edge production squad, the record mashed up pop-polish rock grit and soulful depth, creating a sound that felt both immediate and like it had been around forever. The flagship track, What's Love Got to Do With It, shot straight to the top of the Billboard Hot 100. and snagged her 3 Grammys, including the big one, Record of the Year. At 44 years young, she was arguably past the sell-by date for female pop stars in the eyes of the major labels. But here is the kicker, she was barely warming up. The massive explosion of Private Dancer floored the critics and the public, not because they doubted her pipes, but because the industry suits had already decided she was yesterday's news. In a game obsessed with youth, she obliterated the rules. Rocking that iconic lion's mane wig, a leather mini, and that signature rasp that could cut glass, she didn't just walk back onto the stage. She kicked the front door down. That record moved more than 10 million units worldwide, taking her from a nostalgia act to a bona fide global superstar. Was this her final clapback? It was taking back every single thing they said she couldn't be. She stood there powerful, culturally relevant, and finally totally in the driver's seat. This era also signalled a massive visual and stylistic evolution for her brand. No more matching outfits or the rigid dance steps of the Ike and Tina days. In their place was a woman unleashed, using her past trauma not as a cage but as high-octane rocket fuel. Tracks like Better Be Good to Me and I Can't Stand the Rain were way more than just radio hits. They were anthems of personal freedom. Every line she sang seemed to vibrate with years of survival, and her stage presence a totally different ballgame. The shows got rockier, grittier, and way more intimate. For Tina, winning wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about radical self-expression. Looking back now, Private Dancer was bigger than just money in the bank. It was a seismic shift in pop culture. Tina smashed through industry barriers, racial divides, and age discrimination to become one of the rare black women to rule both pop and rock radio on her own terms. This wasn't just about the tunes. It completely changed the blueprint for what a second act looks like in Hollywood. By doing that, she became a beacon, not just for reinvention, but for owning your narrative, your voice, and your future. Turner didn't just come back, she was resurrected. Now let's pivot to the man who helped heal her heart, Erwin Bach. Their romance didn't start with a Hollywood explosion, but with a simple, quiet moment at an airport back in 1985. Back then, Bach was a German record executive just doing his job. He was sent to pick Tina up when she landed in Dusseldorf. She was 46, deep in the grind of her solo explosion, and definitely not looking for a boyfriend, especially after the nightmare she lived through before. But something about Erwin's vibe hit her instantly. Tina later confessed in interviews that her heart actually started pounding the second she laid eyes on him. However, with the emotional scars she carried, she didn't let herself get swept away immediately. She kept her guard up. It started off as a slow burn, a friendship that gradually morphed into something built on real trust. After escaping a marriage defined by terror and domination, Tina walked into love with her eyes wide open and her walls up. The big question was, could she let someone in without risking that same devastating heartbreak? And honestly, her fears made total sense. She wrote in her book that she worried she was too broken to ever love the right way again. But Erwin was different. He was steady as a rock patient and never pushed her to go faster than she wanted. What he gave her was something she had almost never experienced: behind closed doors emotional security. Bit by bit, his gentle nature helped her release that deep-seated terror that love always has a terrible price tag attached to it. They stayed together for a whopping 27 years before Tina finally said "I do" in 2013. By that point, they had already crafted a beautiful life over in Switzerland, where Tina eventually picked up citizenship. The ceremony at their lakeside manor was super private and classy, with A-listers like Oprah and Bryan Adams showing up to celebrate. But the ultimate proof of their devotion happened in 2017 when Erwin stepped up to donate one of his kidneys to Tina when hers were failing. She was absolutely floored by it, later writing that she had made peace with dying rather than hooking herself up to dialysis machines. His sacrifice literally gifted her a second lease on life. Their love story was the polar opposite of the toxic dynamic that almost killed her decades prior. With Erwin, Tina found more than romance. She found true restoration. He never needed her to be the superstar, just her flawed, open, and utterly magnificent. When reflecting on her life in later years, Tina defined her marriage to Erwin Bach not by fireworks, but as a sanctuary of genuine peace. It It wasn't about the drama that fueled the tabloids. It was about him showing her that love didn't require her to sacrifice her soul or erase her identity. She often noted that her true victory wasn't the massive comeback tours or the platinum records that decorated the second act of her career. The real triumph was the quiet, steady joy of finally being understood, chosen and cherished for the woman she was when the stage lights went dark. Tina Turner remains an absolute titan of culture and feminism. To say her legacy is limited to rock and roll would be a massive understatement, as her impact reaches into the very fabric of society. She stands tall as one of the most enduring and powerful symbols of female strength across both the 20th and 21st centuries. Her journey, climbing out of the depths of abandonment and brutality to reach the summit of stardom, strikes a chord with every woman who has ever had to scream to be heard or fight for a safe space in this world. Turner did far more than just survive a nightmare domestic situation. She completely rewrote the script on what a survivor looks like in the harsh glare of the public eye. By refusing to sweep her trauma under the rug, she handed a lifeline to countless other women, effectively giving them permission to face their own demons. Through her honesty, she redefined strength, proving it isn't about never getting hurt, but about possessing the sheer will to stand back up when the world tries to knock you down. Taking the reins of her own narrative was a revolutionary act, especially in an era when women, and particularly black women, were expected to smile, sing, and stay silent. By reclaiming her truth through explosive memoirs, films, and candid interviews, Tina transformed herself into a living, breathing beacon of feminist grit. She drew a hard line in the sand, refusing to be reduced to a footnote in a man's biography. Whether that meant shedding the label of Ike Turner's battered wife, or rejecting the industry's attempt to cast her aside as an aging nostalgia act. Instead, she carved out her own kingdom on her own terms, amplifying her own voice until it was the only one that mattered. Today, feminist scholars and cultural critics look to her as the ultimate blueprint for autonomy, showing exactly how personal freedom and artistic genius can fuse into a powerful form of activism. You see her influence splashed across pop culture and glossy magazines, where she is immortalized as the archetype of the fierce, unshakable diva. In every retelling of her life, she is celebrated with reverence. We see her DNA in the way Beyoncé commands the stage during a Super Bowl halftime show, paying homage to the Queen of Rock and Roll. We feel her presence when Angela Bassett delivers an Oscar-worthy performance. Turner's impact spans generations and refuses to fade. Her biography is taught now as a masterclass in redemption, going way beyond a simple story about musical excellence. It has become the survival guide for artists and everyday people alike, specifically those breaking free from cycles of abuse, reinventing their careers, or battling the twin evils of ageism and systemic racism. And let's talk about the look, those shimmering metal dresses, the iconic lion's mane hair, and the legs that went on for days. With her unapologetically sexy style, Tina shattered every rule about how a woman in her 40s, 50s or 60s was supposed to present herself to the world. Perhaps the biggest testament to her cultural weight is that when the average person thinks of her today, they don't just hear a song, they think of the word survivor. Drawing from her own brutal battles with society's expectations and the stigma surrounding abuse in the entertainment business, she turned her recovery into a complex, ferocious and ever-evolving vision of womanhood. Even after her passing, her spirit acts as a rallying cry and anthem for anyone trying to break free, whether from a toxic partner, a restrictive industry, or the prison of their own self-doubt. She didn't just break glass ceilings, she took the shards, paved a runway and strutted over them in 6-inch stilettos, daring the rest of us to follow her lead. But we cannot tell her story without discussing the spiritual engine behind the comeback, the role of Buddhism. Discovering Buddhism in the 1970s wasn't just a hobby. It was a quiet revolution that provided the spiritual backbone for her entire personal reconstruction. During the absolute lowest points of her chaotic marriage to Ike Turner, amidst the violence and despair, Tina was introduced to Nichiren Buddhism and the practice of chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. She admitted she was skeptical at first, but she started chanting out of sheer desperation, looking for a moment of peace, some mental clarity, or just the grit to make it through another day. What she found was a suit of armour for her soul and a growing sense of agency. The practice offered her more than just temporary comfort. It gave her a concrete framework to rebuild her shattered identity from the inside out, turning a daily ritual into a lifeline. Eventually, this spiritual discipline became her primary tool of liberation. Tina often credited the chanting with helping her smash the psychological shackles that had kept her trapped in a loop of fear and worthlessness. She once said in an interview that she realised she didn't have to suffer anymore, a realisation that was nothing short of revolutionary for her. The Buddhist focus on self-determination and tapping into inner strength mirrored the path she would take in her music-shedding external control to reclaim her voice. That chant became the soundtrack to her survival, a rhythm that fueled her healing process. Long before Private Dancer made her a global solo superstar. As she rebuilt her career brick by brick, Tina didn't hide the source of her strength, openly discussing the Buddhist teachings that saved her, which was incredibly rare for a Western celebrity at the time. She spoke about her spirituality with a refreshing freedom, devoid of preachiness or shame, allowing her to connect deeply with a massive audience beyond her fan base who were desperately searching for meaning and strength in their own lives. She also totally flipped the script by dropping a spoken word and musical project called Beyond Stepping Way outside the rock genre she dominated. Back in 2010, this project mashed up global Buddhist chants with deep spiritual traditions, creating a vibe no one saw coming. While the tabloids fed on the pain and high-octane performances that made her a legend, this era was all about her finding some serious peace and presence. Buddhism became her secret weapon, the tool that didn't just help Tina survive the horror show of her past, but actually allowed her to rise above it like a phoenix. Consequently, Tina Turner's spiritual journey wove itself right into the fabric of her public image, becoming as iconic as her wigs. It made her incredibly relatable to women and survivors everywhere who looked at her and saw a blueprint for how to heal without erasing the scars. Is it a stretch to say that chanting gave her the power to heal from trauma and completely rewrite her own Hollywood ending? For Tina, getting spiritual wasn't about running away from reality or dodging the paparazzi. It was about existence. She wasn't trying to erase the nightmare she came from, but rather finding the strength to own it and thrive within it. Ultimately, this wasn't just Tina Turner practicing Buddhism for the sake of faith or a celebrity trend. It was a radical act of reclaiming her power, choosing self-love and chanting her way back to her own body, her voice and her absolute truth. Her speaking voice might have quieted down, but the energy she left behind is making more noise now than anyone in the industry anticipated. The legacy is unstoppable. When Tina Turner passed in 2023, it didn't just leave a hole in our hearts. It sparked a massive urgency to properly honour the Queen of Rock and Roll. In the years since she left us, including right now in 2026, we've seen a tsunami of tributes and never-before-seen footage flooding our feeds, proving she is still the moment. The biggest bombshell recently has been the posthumous drop of Hot For You Baby, a vault track that exposes Tina's raw, electrifying vocal power in a way we haven't heard in decades. The track sounds completely timeless, and fans and critics are losing their minds over how it perfectly bridges her soulful R&B roots. It seamlessly connects with that gritty, rock-infused sound that defined her massive solo comeback years, reminding everyone why she was the boss. Is this single just a teaser for a treasure trove of hidden gems waiting to be raided from the Turner archives? But it is not just about the music charts. Tina's dramatic life story continues to sell out theatres and resonate on the big stage. The Broadway smash hit Tina. The Tina Turner musical, which premiered before she passed, has taken on a whole new level of emotional weight these days. Audiences are sobbing, cheering and connecting with her struggle more intimately than ever, feeling every beat of her journey. The show, which tracks her grind from Nutbush, Tennessee to global superstardom, has basically morphed into a living, breathing memorial service. It invites the crowd to do more than just watch. They are there to feel the pain and the triumph, with new productions opening internationally to spread her gospel to the next generation. Is Tina becoming that rare icon whose biography is actually more legendary and culturally significant than her discography? Documentaries have been huge in shaping the narrative of how we remember Tina's life and her escape from toxicity. HBO's 2021 documentary, simply titled Tina, dropped just before the end and served as what many call her final definitive mic drop on her own legacy. In that film, she kept it real about her gratitude for the fame, but she also made it clear she was done being defined solely by the abuse story. She looked the camera in the eye and said, "It wasn't a good life, but the second half, that was where the magic happened." Since she's been gone, Hollywood is buzzing with rumours about new biopics, specifically a film focusing on her life post-Private Dancer, an era that usually gets skipped over. Could a movie like that finally give proper credit to the powerhouse businesswoman and artist she evolved into? We definitely need a story that doesn't just fetishise the trauma she overcame, but celebrates the victory she lived. Perhaps the most enduring part of Tina's legacy is her symbolic role as the ultimate fighter in social and cultural advocacy. Her name is dropped not just in music history class, but in serious conversations about domestic violence, ageing in Hollywood black womanhood, and pure resilience. We are seeing murals pop up in cities, scholarship funds being established, and social justice panels organised in her honour. Even college professors are adding her life story to their syllabi as a masterclass in empowerment and self-reinvention. Tina Turner might have left the physical plane, but that gritty, glorious and unrelenting voice is still echoing across time-space and every industry imaginable. As long as there is someone out there who needs proof that you can start over and win, her legacy is going to burn bright. If Tina Turner's incredible comeback story hit you in the feels, make sure to smash that like button right now. Drop a comment with your favourite Tina moment, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold lives of legends. If you are ready to get the tea on the next icon, go ahead and click the video popping up on your screen. Trust me, you are not going to want to miss what we have got coming next.